right, Lo. See what you got. You're quick.
You're so funny.
We walk into a room again. This time, 5 ballots. They're all yellow again. They all tell us if we're going to move forward or backwards. Again. But this time, we get told, I didn't buy your argument, because the third internal about discourse producing solvency just didn't really do it for me. Because their response about how you need to understand and engage with others, specifically through some kind of textual discourse that we can produce large, long-term solvency, just won the round. I felt better. We lost, but I know why. It's not because I'm a bad person. It's not because I'm a bad debater. It's because, well, we didn't get to the third argument. On case. Frankly, what the round ends up being, and the only real way out for the opposition, or in this case, sorry, the government, is the second policy plank that comes out of, guess what, the MG. Suddenly that it's okay for text and performance to be affirmative ground. I think we give you pretty clear articulation at the beginning of off case that rejection requires utter removal and refusal. Like that interpretation came out at the very beginning of the first exclusion position. The shifting interpretation out of the MG is the only way they garner any kind of solvency or offense on the off case positions. That's the only way that they get any access is by saying performance is okay as long as textual is included. That doesn't actually deal with the argument that says rejection requires cutting out and throwing away. Every time you use a textual performance and then claim solvency happens through performance, it's still a performative debate. No matter how you frame the debate, the performance becomes the solvency. And when that happens, you're performing. That means that they don't gain they don't get to leverage anything against the off case, and pretty much what we have to do then is weigh the advantage against the two disadvantages. We have exclusion and inclusion versus textual is better. The real problem here is they extend all of their arguments, but they don't give us any conception of how they interact with the counter-arguments off case. We give you insights specifically about how exclusion takes people out of the event, specifically theater majors that maybe don't understand an engineer's style of logic, or maybe engineers who frankly don't understand epistemology. When we see the multiplicity of debate allowing further forms of engagement on the inclusion position, that means we can just outweigh on the education level. Because remember, they concede that they linearize education by producing a single textual interpretation of how learning functions. When we break down the linearization of education, we provide for a much more diverse understanding of what a debate round is intended to achieve. Even further than that, what I think becomes really important is that we just can't weigh effectively how we destroy debate, but they don't give us any links specifically to how performance with textual advocacy doesn't solve. So pretty much, I think the round's going to come down to, does plank 2 go gov, or does plank 2 go up? The reason this becomes important, and the reason I think we're frankly winning, is out of the LO, we give articulation that rejection requires only textual advocacy. Like, we don't hear a response in the MG, merely an assertion that advocacy text can morph into the consumption or permutation of the two positions. Without access to the permutation, that means not only does solvency occur for the opposition, but there's no advantage to choosing the government. Because the inclusion and exclusion arguments still stand. We don't hear any articulation on how textual argumentation doesn't produce performative exclusion on the basis of taglines and targets and frameworks. Since we don't hear any answering to exactly how the internals function, I think that's really where we're going to be winning the round. Remember, as we said in the Millsian democracy position, engage the other, be it in whatever form you choose. Textually assault them, performatively assault them, deal with the problem. Don't call on your judge to reject their performance because it is.
All right, wrap it up for us.
Those 5 yellow ballots are all going to say the same thing. I vote gov on the drop definition at the top of the PMC. Go to the top of the PMC, we give you a specific definition of what constitutes a performance, and we give you a justification of bright line. I think that the necessary of Brightline has been demonstrated in this round because there's some question about what happens if it's textual plus performance. Our argument is that it's only performance if it's non-textual. This definition is conceded. There was no topicality argument. It never comes out. This means it's a legitimate extension of our plan text that so long as there's a text or a frame, so to speak, then it is a textual advocacy. With that concession made, that means that their ground is defending only performance that doesn't have a frame, and I think that they're just not doing the work there. That severs them completely out of the argument that performance debate for them is performance still if it has text. This precludes their arguments also. They try to make some arguments about, well, it's still performance, but it's logically precluded insofar as they concede an argument out of the LOC. We think that further when the argument is conceded in the MO and the LOR, that's 3 speeches of concessions which are always going to logically preclude any other arguments. We think that that's simply enough. That means when you read our text, which says competitive academic debate that has textual advocacy is preferable to competitive academic that does not, so long as there's textual advocacy, it's our ground. With that, let's go do their position. I want to make a couple of key extensions. The first extension I want you to make is the number 4 argument on the inclusion where Steve makes a permutation. Extend the permutation, that means there's no competitive advocacy that they're offering because we can have it so long as they're framed. I think that you can also go to the argument about Texas Tech. I think the tech argument's important. That shows the dangerous implications that can follow when you don't break frame. They decided to stage a gay bashing outside of Colorado colleges, and the result, since they never break frame, was the fact that the tournament was almost shut down as well as negatively affecting on their program as a whole. Remember, if the net benefit that we're talking about in today's round is always the longevity of the event and what's best for the event, I think that this is always going to be the most horrible thing that happened to an event if the national tournament would have been closed as a result. We think that that argument is just clear offense for Biola. We think that you can go back to the case debate, and I think that there's easy offense there insofar as there's no ink. So if you want an easy way out and you don't think that the definition extension is easy enough, I think the cold concessions on the case debate are enough. And although Zach says that Steve doesn't engage it, I think he does engage it in a few levels. I think the first argument that's important is Steve extensions of the third argument from the subpoint A of our competition advantage, where he says there's an inextricably human thing about language. We make that argument continually that to do art isn't necessarily inextricably human, but to speak, we have a part of the brain that does that. That means if we're talking about inclusion and accessibility, the thing that is uniquely human should be the trait that we go by, not something that is not necessarily human. We think that that argument is always going to be complete offense that is conceded, but we think it's always going to hedge out their performance debate. Regardless, I think you can go down to the end about the arguments about delineation of ground. We think for people to enter the round, they need to know how they can get the yellow thing in front of you. We think that the only way for them to know that is if they, 1, know what their burdens are. What are the things that they have to do to prove the resolution true? Also, they have to know what their opponent's ground is. If they don't know their opponents and what they have to do, they have no way possible of ever getting to that ballot. That's the unique benefit that textual advocacy offers that non-textual advocacy can never guarantee. There is no such mechanism in performance debate. With that in mind, if the part of the event is participation, giving people that opportunity, the only opportunity comes from a vote by recognizing that performance debate isn't such. We think that that's completely coming to off the bottom of the case. Remember, we tell you that it's the most important impact. There's a magnitude weighing that's also conceded by San Diego. We think that that magnitude weighing is always going to be beating us back. I think, however, you can finally go for some other arguments. I think that they make these arguments about rejection means some sort of complete severance, etc. Okay, so that means that if you sign your ballot, you are deciding, and you will leave the room with the conception that performance debates aren't as better as non-performance debates, and we accept that ramification. We think that that ramification is okay. We think that you should always have to break frame. I think another argument that you should extend that Steve makes is key is there are other forums. When we're talking about IE events that have poetry, everybody has the framework because we know it's a poetry event. You don't have that framework if you enter the round and people are just completely silent for the PMC, or if they're drawing pictures on the board the entire PMC. The framework is key to ever having equal opportunity. We think that there are concessions on our case, on their case that give us that. So at the end of the day, you enable equality in the event and the longevity of the event through equal opportunity in the event. With that, we vote for Biola.